going to start building the background. So I put down this cloud image first, and then I started to build off of that. So next I put this city shot and went down here, pressed the mask button, and I painted with a soft brush the areas at the top in order to make the smoke look like it's on top of the city. So I put a levels adjustment layer on top of that. So I just go to adjustment layer, levels. I brought down the blacks to gray to give it a matte look. So the further the things are the distance, the more matte it is. So I did that as well with this, same thing, put a layer mask on it and painted with black the tops and the sides that I do not want. I put a levels adjustment layer on top of that to make the blacks gray, and I did another city shot exactly like that as well. So with this one, I just wanted to continue to build on that kind of cyberpunk look where there's endless city. So once again, layer mask painted with black to get rid of the top area. I put a hue and saturation adjustment layer on top of that, clipped it by pressing Alt or Option and in between, and I pressed colorize, lowered the saturation, gave it a color that I wanted, and increased the lightness. And with this one, on the layer mask, I painted away the bottom. So I painted with black the bottom area because I wanted it to be colored here and then kind of fade into a different color in the back. So at this point I press controller command Alt or Option plus Shift plus E to compile everything into a new layer. And now we have this into one layer. Convert to smart object and then filter, blur, gallery, field blur, and I did that by about 15 pixels. Alright, so the city was a bit dark, so I went ahead and went to adjustment layers and another level layer, and I decreased the blacks and I decreased the exposure as well, and then I painted where I wanted that. Alright, so I started adding some lightning. So I have this lightning asset that I took myself, and I just cut one out with the lasso tool, and I press controller command and then C and then controller command and then V to make that into a new layer, and then I put that into screen blending mode and filter, blur, gallery, field blur, and I did that by about 20 pixels, and I just put it into the place that I wanted. With this layer, it's just a white brush, and I put that opacity to 48. I did it again with orange and put that into screen blending mode, and then here's another lightning shot that I did, and then I put the opacity to 86, and then I continued to build color. So here's another screen blending mode. This one's overlay right there, and then this one's screen blending mode. And then that is pretty much it for the background. So now I went ahead and cut myself out of a picture that I took and started to build the bike. So the first thing that I did was I cut this image out of a tractor that I took in my neighborhood, and I started to build the bike from these two images. So I start to build the bike before I do color grading. So I'm going to go ahead and go through all the layers of the bike. So here's just a motorcycle image. This is from a rocket, and I just continue to build the image. I put this here because I thought that it needed more interest underneath it. So here's just a motorcycle engine, some more interest here. And this is the order that I put it into the image. So I built the bike before I started color grading. There's just a headlight, and then after that I started to color grade the image. So now it's complete, and I just started color grading and adding more lights and interest as well. So I'm just gonna go from the bottom to the top now. So here's an image that I actually paid for the exhaust. All right, so with the color grading, this is the back engine. So I added a color balance adjustment layer, and these are the values I put in to give it more of a red color. And then I use curves adjustment layer and I brought down the side here, and then just painted away some of the tip here. This hue and saturation adjustment layer, I just colorized it, put it into a blue color, and kind of painted a little bit on the tip. So this is the motorcycle seat. And first of all, I wanted to get rid of all that orange. So I put a hue and saturation adjustment layer in there, and I went to the reds, made sure to get it into the areas that I needed it, and decrease the lightness, decrease the saturation all the way. And that got rid of the orange color that I did not want. All right, so there was not very much interest in the seat. It was too clean for my taste. So I got an image of a rusty piece of metal, and I clipped it to the seat and masked away some areas that I did not want. Then I did that again with another texture. This is just a brown color, and I put it into color blending mode, and I painted some brown on there to make it even more rusty. I painted with black to give it more depth. I added a color balance adjustment layer to make it more red because the scene is kind of red. Curves adjustment layer, and I made it darker where there should be shadows. Here's a hue and saturation adjustment layer. I put that into colorize. I increased the lightness, increased the saturation, put it into that blue color of the exhaust, and painted where I thought the light would be spilling on the seat from the exhaust. All right, this is the hydraulic right here. I just put a hue and saturation adjustment layer, decrease lightness, decrease saturation to make it darker. This color balance adjustment layer to make it more red to match the rest of the bike. Curves to make it a little darker. Hue and saturation, and I put that into that blue color just to kind of make it a little more realistic. All right, so this is my shadow I put on the bike, and it's just a multiply blending layer with the opacity of 40%, and I just painted with a color that was on the bike for my shadow. All right, so I did nothing with the color grade with the color balance. This is what I use for my curves to give me more depth where it needed shadows. This curves adjustment layer, I increased the exposure in the midtones. I went to the red, increased the reds in the midtones, and I increased the yellow. So opposite of blue is yellow. I increased the yellows in the midtones as well to give this more of a light on this side. All right, here's another curves adjustment layer to give me more saturation in the midtones and decrease the exposure as well. All right, here's a dodge and burn a little bit. So I just increased the midtones with this curves adjustment layer. Press controller command and I to invert the layer mask to make it black, and with white I painted with a low flow about 7 in the areas I wanted to highlight. All right, I did that one more time in areas that I felt like I needed to make more bright. All right, so this one is the body. This is nothing. The color balance, I did a red and yellow to better match the scene. This curves adjustment layer just decrease the exposure and put shadows where I needed them. Then I did that again to build onto the shadow. This hue and saturation adjustment layer, I colorized, put it into that blue color, and increased the lightness and saturation and painted where I thought the blue would be spilling onto the body. This is just a multiply blending mode, and I selected a color near here and put even more shadow near the engine. This curves adjustment layer, I did kind of the same thing as myself with this curves adjustment layer. So in the RGB, I increased the midtones. The red, I increased the reds in the midtones, and I increased the yellows in the midtones to give it a kind of orange glow along the side here. All right, so this is the motorcycle engine right here. I added a color balance adjustment layer to give it a red tone, and a curves adjustment layer to decrease the exposure, and painted where I thought it needed shadow to give it more depth. This one is just this little handle here. I just wanted to put that there for more interest, so I color graded it with a red and yellow. I added a curves adjustment layer to give it depth, and I did that again to kind of just build onto that. I did do a hue and saturation adjustment layer and colorized it, put it into that blue color, and just kind of painted where I thought it would be spilling onto there from the light. All right, so this is the first engine. So I color graded it to give it a red color, curves adjustment layer, decrease the exposure, painted where the shadows should be, and I continued to build onto that with these curves adjustment layers. So with this layer, I just ended up painting a color onto it because I felt like the curves adjustment layer wasn't doing exactly what I wanted. Okay, so this hue and saturation adjustment layer is for these engines, and I just increased the lightness all the way and colorized it and painted it inside of these. So I did a blue color with a textured brush on the sides, and then I put it in this effect, and I did that on both of those. So I started to build the bloom that you see whenever you take a photograph of light, and I just did that with a screen blending mode and this color. I just continued to build that. This one's a linear dodge add. This one's linear dodge add blending mode. And this is just the headlight shadow. So there's going to be shadow on that. So I painted with brown on top of the headlight, and I gave it depth, a darker color. Then I put this into color dodge blending mode, double click the layer. I unchecked transparency shape layer, press OK, and then I painted with white right on top of that to give it that effect. This is a linear dodge add blending mode with this color, and I just painted a bloom effect right there. This is the same thing, except with this, I squished it to give it a longer bloom. All right, so at this point, I had everything that I wanted on the bike. So I wanted to create heat effect. So in order to do that, I compiled everything that I had already. And I did that by pressing Control or Command Alt or Option plus Shift plus E, and it compiled everything that I needed into a new layer. So I converted that into a smart object, and I went to Filter Gallery, and went to Spatter underneath brush strokes, and I increased the radius and the smoothness until I felt like it looked like heat was coming off of it. So this is what I had come up with. And this one, I put a inverted mask on it by pressing Alt or Option and then the mask button, It turns it black, and then I painted where the heat was coming off, just in these areas. And then I did that one more time to kind of build on that effect. All right, so I put that into a group, and I added a levels adjustment layer and clipped it to the heat group. I made the blacks gray here and decreased the exposure up here. All right, so I just added smoke with a smoke brush that I made personally, just on the edges there. I continued to build smoke. I made a darker smoke in the edges. I added these power lines. They're just 3 lines. I added more power lines. Added these particles, and I continued to add these particles as well. Put this debris there, and I changed the color with the hue and saturation adjustment layer by pressing colorize, decreasing lightness, increasing saturation, and putting it into a brown color to better match the scene. So I put this concrete frame here with some graffiti, and I added a color balance adjustment layer, clipped it to that, made it more blue, and then I decreased the shadows a lot. So I put this fence in there. I put a color balance adjustment layer, clipped to the fence, and I reduced the exposure on the fence as well. This is a picture of snow, and I put a motion blur on it with a distance of 145, and I masked out the center just to see better. Here's more debris that I put in there. I blurred that by 15 pixels in blur gallery and field blur. I added a black and white adjustment layer to do tonal contrasting. So I put this in there, and then I put that into luminosity blending mode, and then I changed the tones. All right, I put a vignette on there with the curves adjustment layer. So I just lowered the shadows and painted black in the center. So I compiled everything by pressing Control or Command Alt or Option plus Shift plus E into a new layer. I put that into a smart object, convert to smart object. And I did a global color grade with camera raw filter. So I went to filter, camera raw filter, and this is what I came up with. All right, so I decreased the exposure, added some highlights, shadows, whites, blacks. I put this curve on there. I changed the colors of the aquas, the yellows, the blue. I decreased the saturation of the blues, decreased yellows, decreased orange. I increased the luminance of these. I added a vignette by 25%, and I did a orange and teal look by decreasing the blue primary, increasing the red primary to give it that orange and teal look. So I added a brightness and contrast adjustment layer, and I just increased it by 11 and painted white where I wanted the brightness. I added a color balance adjustment layer, and I increased the blues and increased the cyan and magenta, and I double click, press Alt or Option, and separated these two, take it out of the highlights. All right, so with this color balance adjustment layer, I went into the highlights, I increased the yellows and the reds, and did the opposite to take it out of the shadows on this side. And I just painted where I thought I wanted that effect. All right, so I added a gradient map, put it into soft light blending mode, put that into 10% opacity, and I used this color, and I painted away some areas that I thought didn't need the color grade. I did that again with this one. This time it's in a normal blending mode with these colors. And then I went ahead and sharpened the image. So to do that, I press Control or Command Alt or Option plus Shift plus E to compile everything that I needed. I put this into a smart object, convert to smart object, and I put a high pass filter on that. So go to filter, other, high pass, and I did that by 2.5 pixels to sharpen the image. I added a vibrance adjustment layer, increased it by 48. I added a selective color adjustment layer and increased the reds in the red tab. So the opposite of cyan is red. And I did that again in the reds. Then I added a noise layer. To add a noise layer, you just go to a new layer, press Alt, then press the new layer. This tab comes up, go to soft light blending mode and fill with 50% gray. Then you get this layer. I'm going to convert this to smart object, filter, noise, add noise. Then I do that by around 40 with uniform. So that is it for the tutorial. I hope that you guys could find something helpful from this, and let me know if you have any questions. Please subscribe to my channel. I would very much appreciate that. That's all I have for you guys. Have a good one.